There are some people in history who are so brilliant, so influential, that the line between who they really were and the legend they became just gets completely blurred. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible examples of this, the story of Imhotep from ancient Egypt. So, who was this guy? Was he a genius architect who literally invented a new kind of building? A brilliant physician whose skills seemed almost supernatural? Or did he become something else entirely? That's what we're going to figure out. Let's peel back thousands of years of myth and try to find the real man. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle that core mystery of the man versus the myth. Then, we'll meet the historical Imhotep and talk about his single greatest achievement. From there, we'll see how his reputation totally transformed, first into a legendary healer, and then, believe it or not, into an actual god. And finally, we'll ask why his story is still so captivating today. Okay, let's jump right in. We're starting at that fascinating crossroads where provable history meets centuries of incredible legend making. So let's get one thing straight right away. Imhotep was not a myth. He was a real guy, a seriously powerful official. But what he did was so groundbreaking that over thousands of years, his story just grew and grew. He became one of the very first people in history to be called something we reserve for the most brilliant minds, a genius. So, who was the real person behind all these stories? To find out, we need to travel way back in time, into the court of one of Egypt's most powerful kings. We're talking about the Old Kingdom, around 2650 BCE. This was a time when Egyptian pharaohs were flexing their power like never before. They were building bigger and bolder than ever. And to do that, they needed brilliant people to make it all happen. And Imhotep? He worked for one of the most important of these kings, a pharaoh named Djoser. So what does the actual hard evidence tell us? Well, inscriptions from his own time show he was a major power player. He wasn't just some builder. Think of him as the king's right-hand man, a top official, a trusted advisor, and a master scribe. Now, being a scribe back then meant you could read, write, and do complex math. That was like having a superpower. It put him right at the heart of power in the capital city, Memphis. And all of those skills, planning, managing, advising, they all came together in one history-changing project, a complete revolution in architecture out in the desert at a place called Saqqara. The idea he had was so simple, but it was absolutely world-changing. See, before Imhotep, kings were buried in these low, flat-roofed tombs called mastabas. His big idea was, hey, what if we stack them? Just put one on top of another, making each one a little smaller. And the result? Boom! The world's very first step pyramid. And you have to understand, this was so much more than a bigger tomb. This was a total game changer. It was the first time anyone had built something so massive entirely out of stone. The logistics, the planning, the sheer manpower it took was on a scale no one had ever seen. And it wasn't just the pyramid. He designed a whole complex around it, a sacred city for his king's afterlife. And here's the really amazing part. We know his name. Think about it. Think of all the incredible ancient wonders built by anonymous people. With the step pyramid, we know the guy responsible. His name, Imhotep, was so tied to this incredible achievement that it echoed through history, making him one of the very first architects we can actually name. But his story doesn't end with his death. Oh no, that's actually where the legend really takes off. So how in the world did a brilliant architect become famous as a master healer? This chart really lays it out perfectly. On the left, you've got the facts, what we know from his lifetime. The high official, the master administrator, the architect. But on the right, that's the legend that grew over centuries. The wise sage, the divine healer, even the author of secret medical books. So how does that happen? Well, it actually kind of makes sense. In a society that deeply respected knowledge, a man known for being a master of writing, math, and massive projects would naturally be remembered as being incredibly wise. The legend of the great sage grew directly from the seeds of his real-life, verifiable skills. But the story didn't stop at wise man. The legend just kept growing and growing until it reached the ultimate promotion for any mortal. Imhotep became a god. And look at this timeline. This transformation took forever. He starts as a real person around 2650 BCE. 1,000 years later, in the New Kingdom, he's remembered as a great wise man. 1,000 years after that, people are actively worshiping him as a god of medicine. He became so famous for healing that when the Greeks arrived in Egypt much later, they basically said, "Oh, you mean Asclepius?" Their own god of medicine. And this wasn't just some honorary title. For regular people, this meant a man who had actually lived and breathed thousands of years ago was now a divine being they could pray to. They built temples to him. People would make long journeys, almost pilgrimages, to his shrines, begging him for cures. He had become a central part of their religious life. So after this unbelievable journey from man to legend to God, spanning thousands of years, what is it about Imhotep that still grabs our attention today? I think this quote just nails it. His fame doesn't come from winning battles or conquering lands. It comes from his mind. He is remembered as a thinker, a planner, and a creator. Ultimately, the legend of Imhotep is a celebration of human intelligence. His story is this powerful reminder that history isn't only shaped by kings and armies. It's also built by the brilliant thinkers, the designers, and the planners whose ideas can literally change the world. And that leaves us with a final, pretty wild thought. Here we are, almost 5,000 years after he lived, and we're still talking about him. It really makes you wonder, who from our time will still be a legend 4,000 years from now? And when their story is told, will it be the truth of who they were or the myth they became?